54321. The Kolodzey family of Stara Lubovnia, Video 5.2.1, John Jacob Kolodgy in World War I. John Jacob Kolodgy was born the 26th of January, 1898 in Newark, New Jersey. This is the story of his travels during World War I from 1917 to 1919. Please watch video 5.2 to see his full story. On the 2nd of July, 1917, John Jacob enlisted in the New York National Guard ahead of action in World War I. He was assigned to F Company, 12th Infantry Regiment, which was headquartered at Fort Hamilton, New York. But, after the unit received letters and telegrams on his behalf, John J. Kolodgy was soon assigned to 165th Infantry Regiment, Company D on the 12th of August, 1917 at the rank of private as shown on his official military record. 165th Infantry was formerly the Fighting 69th, a legendary all-Irish and all-Catholic regiment that gained fame during their service in the Civil War. Under the New York National Guard, 165th Infantry Regiment was headquartered on the corner of Lexington and 25th Avenue in Manhattan where it stands today. As 165th Infantry began mobilizing for overseas duty in France, the unit organized at Camp Albert Mills, about a mile northeast of Hempstead on Long Island, where the men lived in tents while conducting training for combat. John J. Kolodgy bivouacked there from about the 1st of September to the 26th of October, 1917. On the 27th of October, John and a portion of the 165th boarded the SS Tunisian and sailed from Hoboken, New Jersey to Montreal and then on to Liverpool, England with a destination of Brest, France. They were aboard the sailing vessel for more than 2 weeks from the 26th of October to the 12th of November. After they arrived at Brest, France on the 16th of November, they marched to the train stations and traveled by rail across northern France through various cities, including Dijon before detraining at Neufchâteau on the 21st of November. Being infantry, John walked hundreds of miles carrying all that he possessed upon his back, and after offloading the train at Neufchâteau, his unit marched out to the small village of Nives-en-Blois, making do with whatever lodgements they could find amongst the farm animals and dung piles in barns and haylofts. They stayed there from Thanksgiving until they departed on a road march 20 miles south to the town of Grande, arriving just before Christmas, on the 23rd of December, 1917. Father Duffy described a picturesque mass in the chapel in Grande on Christmas Eve that the unit attended with their French hosts before enjoying a well-provisioned meal on Christmas Day. The day after Christmas, the unit began a grueling march for another 40 miles to the south through the Vosges mountain range in freezing conditions where Father Duffy described spots of blood seen along the road likely due to frostbitten feet. They marched along country roads through villages that included Semily, Dalecourt, and Neuilly-l'Evêque. The 165th arrived in Longeau on the 29th of December. They encamped and conducted training at Longeau until receiving orders to occupy a portion of the front-line trenches in the east. They marched out to Langres to get on trains bound for Luneville on the 16th of February, 1918. Arriving at Luneville on the 22nd of February, they offloaded trains and marched 5 miles east, past the town of Croismare, to a bivouac area named Camp New York, 4 miles south of the trenches. The 165th would be the first U.S. unit to occupy the front lines, and soon afterward they paid their dues as newcomers in both blood and suffering, earning deep respect from the French army. While in the trenches from the 1st to the 23rd of March, 1918, 165th suffered losses from heavy shelling and mustard gas attacks by the German forces on the opposite side of the trenches. The nickname of the trench line where 165th manned was Rouge Bouquet, although the conditions in the trenches were no bundle of flowers. In fact, they were downright miserable, wet, muddy, often freezing with bullets singing overhead. In the trenches the men occupied bunkers and foxholes, and on the 7th of March, heavy shelling made a direct hit on one of those bunkers and collapsed it on top of soldiers trapped underneath. Only 2 were rescued, 21 remained there in eternal rest. The day after until March 15th, John was ill enough to be put on sick quarters, meaning he was restricted to his bed area until he recovered. On the 23rd of March, the regiment was replaced in the trenches, and they hiked through Hordenville on their way to St. Point, where they stayed until the 29th of March. 165th was scheduled for rest and recuperation along with light training. However, they were rerouted back to the front to once again occupy the trenches, this time a few miles southeast of Rouge Bouquet near the village of Ancevilla. 165th was the only U.S. unit to be given complete responsibility of frontline trenches without French oversight during the entirety of World War I. They occupied the lines there until the 13th of May, when they marched back to the city of Pekar to catch up on their rest. However, once again, their rest was cut short. On the 18th of June, they marched out for 20 miles through the towns of Moimont and Moreville. At Châtel-sur-Moselle on the 23rd of June, the 165th boarded trains en route to Kugel. The 113-mile train ride took them through the cities of Nancy, Bar-le-Duc, and Chalons before arriving at Kugel on the 24th of June. D Company marched out from Kugel 5 miles south to the village of Breuvry, where they bivouacked a few days before marching north up to Vardonnay Farms and onward to École de Terre on July 4. The next day, they hiked the rest of the way up to their positions, once again on the front lines. John's unit, Company D, was the first company to occupy the trenches near Bois de la Lyre. 165th held the lines as they and the Germans attacked one another with heavy artillery and raids. Both the Germans and the 165th suffered heavy losses. 2nd Battalion had suffered the most. The rest and recuperation that was planned for 165th when leaving the front lines was once again delayed. While in the trenches near Vardonnay, 165th received word that the Germans had pushed deeper into France near the Ourcq River north of Paris, and 165th was redirected to go stop the German advance. On the 21st of July, 165th was relieved of their spot in the trenches to halt the German advance. They marched 7 miles south to St. Hilaire Temple to get on box-car trains that would take them to the Château-Thierry region northeast of Paris. Because German advances threatened the region, their trains had to take them south to St. Dizier, west through Troyes, then back north up to Noisy-le-Sec and on to Meaux on the northeast side of Paris, where they would offload and march north. They marched 13 miles up to Champigny-sur-Marne and stayed there in relative comfort for a few days until the 26th of July. On that day, they loaded up on trucks and rode through the mostly destroyed town of Vaux, much like the town on fire shown in the movie in 1917, and Château-Thierry up to Epids, where they offloaded and took a short hike up to Château-Moucheton tucked away in the forest just north of Epids. Throughout their trip from the front lines in Vardonnay to Epids, French citizens everywhere cheered the Americans as they rode and marched through the countryside, knowing that their arrival might bring an early end to the 4 years of stalemate and trench fighting. They were right. The battle that lay ahead would be the first in a series of victories that would bring an end to the war. As the 165th made its way up to positions along the Ourcq River, a small creek by American standards, they marched east to Croix Rouge Farms, a position recently won by the 167th Alabamians with fighting so intense that victory was won with bayonets, then due north to the village of Villers-sur-Fier, where they would prepare for an attack against the Germans. The companies advanced upon their objectives, first in perfect formations, and as enemy fire increased in intensity, they began crawling on the ground towards their objectives. Under heavy rifle and machine gun fire from machine gun nests, 165th suffered heavy losses, but so did the Germans. Neither side relented. D Company was positioned on the far right of the regiment next to L Company, sharing battle space with the neighboring regiment. D and L companies achieved the objective of Mercy Farms and provided supporting fire to suppress enemy troops located in the nearby woods known as Bois Colas. While holding Mercy Farms, they managed to force the Germans from their positions, and with their own troops evacuated from Bois Colas, German artillery began shelling Mercy Farms. Undaunted, 165th crept forward on their bellies without pause, each man separated to prevent mass casualties and each with his own motivation to achieve the overall objective of taking the hilltop where the enemy artillery was pounding them from. As bad as the artillery was, the machine guns were worse. With half of its men lost, the 165th attained their objective of the German hilltop position, namely Hill 152. 165th had defeated the 4th Prussian Guard Division commanded by the Kaiser's son. When the German guns finally fell silent, the living collapsed in exhaustion, and death was the only one moving about. D and L companies faced heavy casualties from the machine guns, and those tasked with rescuing the wounded from the battlefield were also wounded. Many were killed. It was during the battle on this day, Sunday, the 28th of July in 1918, that John Jacob Kolodgy was wounded in combat, likely while helping the wounded to move out of the direct fire of the enemy. As 165th held Hill 152, they took on the unenviable task of removing the dead and evacuating the injured. The 165th reconsolidated into the Foyer de Fer and awaited relief from another division. In the meantime, they took on the heartbreaking task of burying their 6,000 brothers, cousins, and friends that had died in the battle. The 42nd Infantry Division established a cemetery at the battle site, known as the Oise American Cemetery, the second largest in France. The sheer number of white crosses there serve as testimony to America's resolve. The sight of them is both staggering and saddening. On the 11th of August, 1918, the 165th marched out from the Ourcq River area to Chateau Thierry, where they embarked on a train bound for Langres, where they were to rest and refit for a few weeks, but on the 29th of August, they began a long march to again respond to German attacks. They marched 19 kilometers to Viaucourt, where they stayed until the 3rd of September. They marched 15 more kilometers and stayed in the Bois de Raidon, and then 23 kilometers more to Boligny on the 5th of September. The next day, they marched 18 more kilometers to Fougue and then on to Buch. While in Buch on the 8th of September, the general of the armies, John J. Pershing, visited the men and presented Distinguished Service Crosses. On the 10th of September, they received orders to move to Saint-Mihiel. On the 12th of September, 165th jumped off and made exceptional advances against the Germans, through a succession of towns and woods, routing them in pan all the way up to St. Benoît with incredible momentum. By the 16th of September, the 165th had met all of their objectives and were relieved by another division, and they marched back to La Marche to board buses bound for the next battle. For the third time in only 3 months, the 165th was in another battle with almost no rest. The 165th arrived at Mondricourt on the 2nd of October, marched north to Jubcourt on the 4th of October, and bivouacked in the Bois de Montfaucon, woods of the mountain Falcon, on the 5th of October. Within 5 days, they marched northward to Chaudron Farms and Examont, where they participated in the offensive to push through the German front lines. They jumped off on the 12th of October and faced heavy casualties in the battle that pushed northward to Sommerance north to Landres. Their objective was a hilltop behind German lines named Côte de Châtillon. By the 21st of October, they reached the objective and pushed northeast to Landres St. George. By this time in the war, Father Duffy cited that less than 600 of the original regiment remained, and that it was made up of mostly replacements, more than 80%. John Jacob was one of those remaining originals, which was probably a consideration for his next assignment. On the 23rd of October, John J. Kolodgy was selected to escort prisoners of war, due to his medical service experience and perhaps his heritage. A few weeks after his assignment with the 70th Prisoner of War Escort Company, John J. was promoted to the rank of Private First Class on Armistice Day, the 11th of November, 1918. In January of 1919, John J. departed Europe from Brest, France back to Boston, Massachusetts, and onward to Camp Devens at the end of his overseas service. John Jacob had an exemplary record throughout his service in World War I. After returning home to the United States after the war, John Jacob was honorably discharged from the active army on the 25th of January, 1919. He had served since the 2nd of July, 1917, with 14 months overseas in combat. He fought in 4 campaigns, including the Champagne-Mont campaign, the Aise-Mont campaign, the Saint-Mihiel campaign, and the Meuse-Argonne campaign. He was wounded in combat, decorated with several awards including the French Furigie and perhaps the Croix de Guerre, and was promoted to the rank of Private First Class. He had marched more than 1,100 kilometers, 683 miles, in France and helped Allied forces to win the war. Sometime after the war, Father Francis Duffy, who was the chaplain of 165th Infantry, turned his journal into a book and published it, wherein he listed John Jacob as a litter-bearer who did extraordinarily fine work. Much of what we know about 165th in World War I is attributable to Father Duffy's journal. Finally, he was named in Father Duffy's book as having been a soldier nominated by his fellow soldiers as having gone above and beyond during the Battle of the Ourcq during the Eisenmont campaign. This task organization chart shows where John Jacob's company fit into the 165th Infantry Regiment and its higher headquarters, the 83rd Infantry Brigade, and its overall command, the 42nd Infantry Division. To learn more about the 165th in World War I, here are some good sources. This concludes video 5.2.1. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe for updates to this and other videos.